Yesterday we started discussing the hadith that mentions the isbal. Isbal means to drag the clothing below the level of the ka'b. The ka'b in Arabic, ka'b comes from the protrusion, means protrusion. That's why al-ka'b is called ka'ba, because it is protruding above the ground level. So this is the ka'b. Those two bones on the side of the ankle are ka'b. Okay, we also say about the bone in the back, the heel bone, we also call it ka'b. But these, when we refer to the hadith of isbal, that our clothing should not be below the level of the ka'b, the hadiths are referring to these two bones on the sides, not your actual heel, because there's nothing below your heel. Where can it go below that, right? So it's referring to these bones, okay? Below that, it's called isbal. They say better not to cover the ka'b, but it is still permissible to cover down to the lower edge of this bone, but not to go beyond that. This is the sound opinion, and we discussed it a bit briefly yesterday, and I'd like to mention more about it, because the hadith that says ثَلَاثَةٌ لَا يُكَلِّمُهُمُ اللَّهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ, 3 classes of people, Allah will not look at them, which means Allah will not give them any kind of consideration. I will not even look at you. لَا يُكَلِّمُهُمُ اللَّهُ لا ينظر إليهم sorry لا يكلمهم, Allah will not talk to them, which means they have no excuse. What are you going to say? لا ينظر إليهم, Allah will not even look at them. لا يزكيهم, will not absolve them of their sins. The sin, you know, you're already convicted. لا يزكيهم ولهم عذاب أليم, and for them is a painful torment. And we mentioned, did we mention yesterday the kind of people? Or yes, المسبل والمنان والمنفق سلعته. Actually, there's more than one hadith, but the hadith we read yesterday was the musbil والمنان, the one who drags his clothing below the level of the protruding bones above the ankle. والمنفق سلعته, والمنان means the one who recounts and reminds people of the favors he has done to them. You do a favor for the sake of Allah, if you remind people of it, you've actually not only committed a major sin, you've also lost the reward for what you have done. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تبطلوا صدقاتكم بالمن والأذى. You know the Quran, بالمن والأذى. منان, man. This is mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah as well later. Do not cancel your righteous deeds, your sadaqah, your charities, by committing man, by reminding the person you have given of the favors you have done to them. بالمن والأذى. And by also, adha means to be harsh, to abuse them. So you think because you've given them something, they can't talk back at you, or they can't, they can't ask for their rights from you in case you abuse them. No, you have to treat them even nicer than the people you have not done any favor to. You have to treat them even nicer, so as to be very far away from al-man wal-adha. Anyhow, لا تبطلوا صدقاتكم, don't cancel your sadaqah. But here it says والمنان والمنفق سلعته بالحلف الكاذب, and the one who sells his commodity by utilizing false oaths, which means he asks Allah, and he's making Allah a witness over his lies, which means there's disregard for the watchful eye of Allah Azza wa Jal over him. But let's talk about al-isbal again, because this is a good example where you will find in the schools of fiqh, schools of Islamic law, that the sound opinion is with the smallest minority in this matter, the very small minority. Because if I tell you that, so there's 2 kinds of isbal. Having the clothing below the level of the ankle, if somebody does it out of showing off or pride or arrogance, all the Muslim jurists say that this is kabira, this is a major sin. They have not differed on this part, but they have differed on those people who allow their clothing to go below the ankle just because it's their habit, or they didn't give it other consideration, or just because, there's no good reason, but it's not out of pride. Here they differed. Most of the schools of law, like the Shafi'iyya, Hanafiyya, Malikiyya, even most of the Hanabila, say that it is makruh. It's not even haram. I wanted to mention that. But if you look at the hadith are very strong in warning. The school of al-Zahiriyya, they said it is haram, it is a major sin. even without pride, even without arrogance. It is still, and some of the Hanabila, only a portion of the Hanabila, a minority of the Hanabila. But if you look at the Hanabila, the contemporary Hanabila, most of them say it's a major sin. But the old Hanabila, the majority of them considered it as makruh, detestable only, not even haram. But if you look at the hadith, I'm not talking about this hadith, because this hadith probably refers to the people who do it out of arrogance. But you find other hadith saying, ما أسفل الكعبين فهو في النار. Whatever goes below the level of the ankles or those protruding bones, it is in the fire of hell. So there's a clear threat with the fire of hell. So how can it be? How can it be just makruh and detestable? And there's another hadith that says, أزرة المسلم إلى منتصف ساقيه فإن زاد فإلى الكعبين. The best clothing of the Muslim is to the middle of the legs, and if it exceeds فإلى الكعبين, down to the ankles. وما أسفل الكعبين فهو في النار ومن جر ثوبه خيلاء لم ينظر الله إليه. So he mentioned here all the levels. The best is to the middle of this is a hadith in one sound hadith, the middle of the leg. And he says if you have to go beyond that, you go down to the Ka'b, to those protruding bones. You can still cover them. Although some scholars said it's makruh to cover them, but it's still allowed. Most of them say it's allowed. And then he says whatever below is those protruding bones is in the fire of hell. And then he referred to the other kind of isbal, which is man jarra thawbahu khuyala lam yanzur illahu ilayh. Whoever does this out of arrogance on top, so he's done it, but he added to it pride and arrogance and showing off, then Allah, this kind of punishment applies to them. And one time Prophet ﷺ saw a man also having his clothing below, and he says, ittaqillah warfa izarak. He says, fear Allah and bring your clothing, or izar. Izar is what covers the lower half. But it applies to izar, it applies to thawb, whatever, any kind of garment, cloak, we should try to keep. And when the hadith, the people who said it's makruh, they relied on the hadith of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, when he heard the Messenger ﷺ warning against isbal, dragging the clothing. He says, in the thawbi ينكشف مني وأنا أتعاهده. He says, my lower garment becomes loose and falls down a little bit, and I keep on pulling it up. So I think it's a misunderstanding, because it is very clear that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq is making it above the ankle deliberately, but sometimes it becomes loose at the waist and falls. So, and then he says, and then I bring it up again. So obviously he never, it wasn't too long, it wasn't long, and even though it is short, whenever it goes down, he brings it up. And then Prophet ﷺ said to him, إنك لست ممن يصنعه خيلاء. He assured him that you are not one of those people who do it out of pride or arrogance or showing off. So I think, although the vast majority of scholars in the past have considered it only makruh, I think the sound opinion is with the minority, which are the followers of the school of Zahiriyya, which means Zahiriyya, it's a school of thought that was prevalent in Andalusia, which is today's Spain and Portugal, and they call the Zahiriyya because Zahiriyya comes from the obvious. They relied on the texts as the literal wording shows. They did not use too much of analogy or deduction. They would take the text as it is and as face value and apply it just as it is. So in many instances, they had the right opinion just because of their literal understanding. But in some other instances, some texts require some kind of thought. We'll come, inshallah, when we go back to discussing fiqh to see some mistakes they can also fall into. So does this make it clear regarding the isbal, guys? Inshallah. Okay, we'll stop here, inshallah. Yeah.